I'm not ashamed to own my Lord, nor to defend his cause. Maintain the honors of his word, the glory of his cross.
Again, thankful for each one's presence this hour, and we will continue in our series here looking at natural science as evidence for the existence of God. And in this lesson, we're going to look at two examples of immense design in the human body, the eye and the ear. We'll talk about the other senses very briefly at the end, but our focus will be on these two, the eye and the ear. And as we've been looking at quotes along the way, we're going to bring in some quotes for this as well. Darwin, in his book, The Origin of Species, he actually mentioned some difficulties with his theory. And one of the challenges that he saw to his theory was the eye and the design of the eye. He acknowledged that as a challenge. He said, to suppose that the eye, with all its immutable contrivances for adjusting for the focus to different distances, for admitting different amounts of light, and for the correction of spherical and chromatic aberrations, could have been formed by natural selection, seems, I confess, absurd in the highest degree. Amen. And if only he had stopped there and stopped writing the book and changed his mind. But he didn't. Despite the absurdity, and he's right, it's absurd to think that our eye somehow could have evolved. But despite the absurdity of thinking natural selection could explain the complexity of the eye, he went on to speculate about how this really wasn't a flaw in his theory. And so the quote continues as in this fashion. He says, "Yet reason tells me that if numerous gradations from a perfect and complex eye to one very imperfect and simple, each grade being useful in its possessor, can be shown to exist, if further the eye does not vary, or does vary ever so slightly, and the variations be inherited, which is certainly the case, and if any variation or modification in the organ be ever useful to an animal under changing conditions in life, then the difficulty of believing that a perfect and complex eye could be formed by natural selection though insuperable by our imagination, should not be considered subversive to the theory." He says reason tells him this. Now, he made a couple of statements in there, a couple of premises. His first premise is absolutely false. It has never been proven, could not be proven. His second and third premises are true, and then that leads to his conclusion. But he does talk about how there's there's things that are inherited. You know, my eye color is based upon my parents, right? We understand that the things do get inherited from one generation on to the next. And now he's not just talking about generations, he's talking about much larger things in this quote. But he acknowledges that, and we acknowledge that, that's true. And he talks about any variation or modification that an organ might receive that would be useful to the animal under changing conditions. Our evolutionary friends would refer to that as microevolution. I despise the term. It is adaptation. And we understand adaptation happens. We can see it around us, and if you look at a species over multiple generations who have moved from one place to another for whatever reason, there may be some changes that have happened. In fact, Darwin, in his own experiments with finches, he noticed adaptation, and because of that he said, see, evolution is true. Well, no, they're still finches. It's just they've adapted because of environmental changes that they're experiencing. But his first premise is the problem. if numerous gradations from a perfect and complex eye to one very imperfect and simple, each gradation being useful in its possessor, can be shown to exist. I'm still waiting to see the evidence of that. Show us the numerous gradations from that simple and imperfect eye to the perfect and complex eye, and I'll believe it. But there's no evidence of that. But notice he brings that up first, and so that slips out of our mind. And the second and third premise that he makes, oh, okay, yeah, that's right. Okay, so it's not subversive to the theory. Yes, it is. Because the first premise is a fairy tale. It's not fact at all. He understood the complexity of the eye demands some great explanation. He would not go to God as the explanation. Well, that's what I believe is the explanation for its complexity. And so we're going to take a look at how complex the eye is. Dr. David Noble, in an article at worldviewweekend.com, he states the following about how complex the design of the eye is. He says, for images to be registered in the brain, it takes an incredibly complex arrangement of photochemical receptors, nerve cells, electrical signals to and within the brain, muscles, tear ducts, skeletal structure, not to mention the absurdly complicated arrangement of molecules which make the eye itself. For example, the retina is a very thin and complex tissue lining the back of the eye. According to Dr. Jeffrey Simmons, the retina contains 7 million cone cells for color assessment, 125 million rod cells for adaptation to the dark, and 1.2 million nerve cells that collect billions of bits of data. Put simply, the entire arrangement has to work or it doesn't work. The whole thing has to be there and has to be working all at once or you don't get sight. It's useless at that point. And so let's talk about the intricate working of the eye. And again, as I've said a few times, I'm not a scientist. I'm certainly not an expert on eyes. I am regurgitating information as I've studied about these things some. And so, but as we look at the eye and how intricate the working of the eye is, light enters in through the cornea into the eye. And how much light enters is determined by the iris, which dilates or constricts accordingly to allow the right amount of light to be able to pass through. And what it's passing through is that little passage right there, which is called the pupil. And so that's how the light is going to get into our eye. Well, that's not enough. There needs to be a lens in place in order for this to work. The lens is what's going to help to focus it. And so we have a lens in our eye. The lens, which is behind the iris, focuses the light onto the retina, and it focuses it through what we call the aqueous humor. Now, the aqueous humor, it's not funny. It sounds funny. But without that, we just simply could not see. It is a clear fluid that makes the image clear. You know, take that away, the image is going to be a blurred image. And so we need that in there in order to give us a clear image. It'd be blurred at best without. So the retina, as we saw in the quote, is covered with millions of photoreceptors. It analyzes color, analyzes shade, and all those kinds of things. But the image that's brought in there, because of the aqueous humor, the liquid that's there, actually is upside down. And so it needs to be turned around. And that's what happens then when it's turned into an electrical signal through the optic disc and then sent out through the optic nerve to the brain, and the brain analyzes what it receives, and we need to flip that image around so that we know that we're walking on the floor instead of on the ceiling. And that's basically what's going on inside of the eye and how it works. Now, that's an extremely simplified description of what's going on. You get an optometrist to tell you about it. He knows a whole lot more about how that works and so forth. But the fact is, all of those things need to be working, and all of them need to be there. There's no opportunity for the eye to develop over time. Take any one of those parts away, the eye does not work. There's no time, and evolution needs time. Time is the god of evolution, if you will. They love time. If we need something to happen, we just throw more time at it, and it'll happen. Throw enough time, and everything can happen, right? Well, that's not how it works. Time does not help with the eye. It's all or nothing. Either it's there and it works, or you're missing something and it's useless to its possessor. It would be unfortunate for such a highly tuned and valuable system to be compromised. And so not only do we have this amazing design for the eye, that's great, but it actually has features of maintenance and protection, self-cleansing and protection. When we're watching a good movie, we watched a movie last night. I don't know if it was good or not because I fell asleep during it. But when we're watching a good movie, sometimes our tear ducts are triggered, right? Our emotions are triggered, and so we start crying during that. Well, that's not the primary purpose of the tear ducts. It's not for the expression of emotion. The tear ducts are active all the time, whether we're emotional or not. And what they're doing is they're keeping our eyes moist. And they're washing away any foreign objects that might have made their way into our eye and on the eye surface and gets rid of that. And again, you and I don't have to think about that. It works automatically. That's how God has made us. But the tear ducts are not alone in keeping the eye clean and protected. There's other systems that are at work here as well. The eyelids and the eyelashes, of course, help to keep foreign objects away. And in fact, you ever have somebody come up at you, maybe when you're in school days, and they go like that towards your eye, right? And automatically your eye closed. You didn't think about that. When something comes towards us, and we may not have time to process whatever it is, but our brain does without us thinking about it, and our eyelids will close, again, to protect our eyes. We don't want things striking our eye. And so we have this reflex response that's built in order to protect the eye. The eye has been compared to a camera. Those who know me or are friends of mine on Facebook, you know that I take a lot of photos. And I really enjoy photography. I've got a couple of cameras that are decent and take some all right photos. And there's certainly some similarities between the eye and a camera. Both of them receive and process light. Both have the ability to control how much light is being permitted in. Both have a lens that helps to focus the image. Both of them receive the image upside down, and then because of the lens, and then need to convert or invert that image. But there are some very big distinctions or differences between these two as well. For a camera to work, if you've got shaky hands, you're not going to take good photos. And some photography, I love taking photos of the moon. And even though my hands aren't overly shaky, I can't just, I need to use my tripod. And sometimes even when you're using the tripod, you may, some of the tripods have a hook where you can put a weight on to make sure that the wind doesn't affect it at all. And because the camera needs to be still. When the camera's moving around, the focus is gone and your image is going to be blurred. Well, have you ever been on a ride at a fair and you're getting jostled all around, your body's bouncing everywhere, but you can see clearly? Your eyes stay in focus. That's a huge difference. A camera actually needs work to focus. Now, the newer cameras, and by newer, it's been out for a while now, but there's the nice little button there called AF, which is autofocus. And I do use that quite often, and that's good. But even that, you need to push slightly down on the camera button, and it moves around a little bit, it autofocuses. That doesn't happen with the eye. It's always focused. There's no need for us to change focus at all. About the only time that your eye's not going to be in focus might be when you just wake up and you're doing this to it, but then you open your eyes up and everything's in focus already. And not only that, but the camera, when you're using the camera, if I was going to take a picture of Jeremy here on the front row, and so I would focus on Jeremy, but Bill's not too far behind Jeremy, but in the photo that I would take, Jeremy would be as clear as could be, and Bill would be a little bit out of focus. And then I go back to John, and John would be even more out of focus than what Jeremy is. And the further back we go, things are more and more out of focus, because a camera needs to focus on one thing. And everything else is going to be a little out of focus. Well, when I'm looking there, I can see Jeremy just fine, and I can see Bill just fine, and I can see John just fine. All of you are in focus. The eye focuses everything all at once, regardless of distance. A camera can't do that. A standard camera lens has a field of view of 55 degrees. We've got a fairly small... When you ever been in a group photo and whoever's taking the photo keeps on telling you, get in closer, right? That's because the camera's limited in what it can do. Now, technology has improved, and Jeremy in his car, he's got that dash cam there, and the dash cam, I think it's about 170 degrees for the dash cam. They're pretty close to 180, maybe not quite there. But do this. Put your hands up beside your ears. Can you see your hands? I'm not asking if you can see them clearly, but if you've got good vision, yeah, I can see both of my hands right now. I'm looking out straight, but I can see both of my hands, and they're beside my ears. That's how great the eye is. Cameras are great. They're man-made. They fall shy of the eye. Now, how is it that the camera, why can't we just put all those pieces of the camera into that box we had last night and just start shaking and eventually get a camera? Because it's not an accident. It was designed by very intelligent people and put together by very intelligent people. So how is it that something that requires that level of design and that level of intelligence to make, and it's inferior to what we have in our bodies, inferior to our eyes, how is it that that needed design and the eye somehow just accidentally came about over millions and millions of years? It's nonsense. Let's talk about the ear. I'm going to take a drink before we move on. Our ears, they serve two functions. The one is obvious. We hear with our ears. But the ear is also involved in balance. And so we'll talk about the hearing first of all. The outer ear, which is the pinna, and the auditory canal, they form sort of a funnel. So the noise, the sound is funneled in to the middle part of the ear. When the sound wave strikes the eardrum at the end of the ear canal, the eardrum ends up vibrating. And that vibration of the eardrum, it's converted at that point into mechanical energy. And so these three bones that are here, just inside the eardrum, the vibration there is turned into mechanical energy, and then moved on through there. The movement of these bones relays it to the cholera or the inner ear, and so this circle area or spiral area that we see there, and that acts as an amplifier. There's fluid in the inner ear that's moving, and what it's doing is it's stimulating these tiny hair cells that are in there. And those tiny hair cells, are what enable us to detect different pitches. That's why we can hear the difference between one person's voice and another person's voice. Otherwise, everything would sound the same. But they help us to detect the different pitches and so forth. The vibration of these hairs turns the sound into electrical pulses at that point. That's what our brain deals with, is the electrical pulses. And so they're transmitted then through the auditory nerve up to the brain, and the sound is then interpreted at the brain. Now, also in the inner ear, we find the eustachian tube, and so that's right here, which is connected to the pharynx. It regulates air pressure in the middle ear with that which is outside. And so remember we were talking about last night when you're taking off in that airplane, or when you're landing, or when you're going below the water, the pressure on your ear, that's what you're doing, is using that when you swallow in order to pop your ear. The ear is also useful for balance, or intended to be used for balance. And so in the upper portion of the inner ear, we've got the semicircular canals. And so there's these 3 fluid-filled sacs that are up there. And our motion, whether it's what we're doing, and so if we're jumping or moving side to side, or things that are being done to us, we're sitting in a car and we're going around a corner, whatever kind of motion our body is experiencing moves the fluid inside those sacs, which in turn moves tiny hairs on the walls inside of those sacs. And they work as motion detectors. And those hairs send information about our movement to the brain to help us stay balanced. That's how we can go ahead and lift one leg up and balance on the other. I'm not doing it that great right there, but that's what enables us to do that kind of thing, or to be able to ride in a vehicle or on a carnival ride without us getting extremely sick or dizzy. Just last month, we went to the carnival in Kingston. And there was one of the rides that we went on, and I don't know if you've been on it, it spins around and around very, very fast. Alien Abduction or something like that was the name of it. But you get forced against this wall, and you're spinning and spinning, and it actually lifts up off of the ground, and it's a neat experience. But when you're done with that ride, and the fluids are still sloshing around even though you're not moving around, and you end up being dizzy because of it. And it was quite an experience. But that's what's going on inside of that inner ear. Most of the times, unless some extreme motion like that, it works perfectly for us. And so helps with our balance. Even earwax has a purpose. Sometimes it's a little extreme, but earwax has a purpose. Audiologists will say that the wax secretion lubricates the inner ear, protects the eardrum from dust and so forth. It'll trap those things to keep the inner ear and the eardrum protected. Consider what Stanley Smith Stevens, who is a psychologist but also founder of Harvard's Psychoacoustic Laboratory, has written. This is in his work called Sounds and Hearing. He says, of all the organs of the body, few accomplish as much in so little space as the ear. If an engineer were to duplicate its function, he would have to compress into approximately 1 cubic inch a sound system that included an impedance matcher, a wide-range mechanical analyzer, a mobile relay and amplification unit, a multi-channel transducer to convert mechanical energy to electrical energy, a system to maintain a delicate hydraulic balance, and an internal two-way communication system. In 1 cubic inch. No engineer can do that. God has done that. That's what we call the ear. He goes on to say this: even if he could perform this miracle of miniaturization, he probably could not hope to match the ear's performance. It can set itself to hear the low throb of a foghorn at one end of its range and the piercing wail of a jet engine at the other end. It can make the fine distinction between the music played by a violin and a viola section of the symphony orchestra. It can reject the hubbub of a cocktail party while picking out a single familiar voice. Even during sleep, the ear functions with incredible efficiency because the brain can intercept and select signals passed to it by the ear. A man can sleep soundly through noisy traffic and the blaring of a neighbor's TV set and then awaken promptly at the gentle urging of a chime alarm clock. Our ears are amazing. What he's talking about there with the ability to distinguish things and whether it's important or not. Shelley wakes up basically anytime Linda makes noise. Because, okay, motherly instinct boosts in and I got to go take care of her. I don't hear it at all. Sorry, Shelley. I don't hear it at all. I'll hear about it in the morning that, well, Linda was up last night and maybe a couple times or something like that. But then there have been a few times where Shelley was at the hospital for surgery and it was overnight. And so I'm at home with Linda by myself and Linda cries and I'm awake. Our ear and our brain are able to work together. You know, the ear was still hearing the same thing when Shelley was there. The brain determined not important. Not that Linda's not important, but Shelley's going to take care of that. Boy, I'm getting myself in trouble. But then when Shelley's not there, the brain says, get up, you got to go. What else explains that kind of complexity? That's not just a matter of physical organs doing physical things. There's something more at work inside of all that. All right, so that's the eye and the ear. We're going to very, very briefly talk about some of the other senses that we have, and nowhere near the kind of detail, but just a few things as we close out our time. Our sense of taste, we have about 10,000 taste buds inside of our mouth. Typically, when we think about our taste buds, we think about them being on our tongue, which is true. Our tongue has all kinds of taste buds, but the roof of the mouth also has taste buds, as does the top portion of our throat. And the taste buds gather information which is then sent to the brain and combined with information gathered by the nose. This afternoon when I have something to eat, I'm not going to taste a lot of it because things are stuffed up right now. The sense of smell and the sense of taste, they work together. And so sometimes if our ability to smell is being interfered with, our perception of how things taste is going to not quite work the way that it does. But 10,000 taste buds that allow us to enjoy all kinds of different flavors, the sweet and the salty and the sour and the bitter, the savory, all those wonderful tastes that we enjoy in our food. But it's also there as a warning. If you and I could not taste things, then we would not know whether what we're eating, unless there's something green growing on it, unless it's supposed to be green, but we wouldn't know whether it's good or bad. Is it healthy or is it gonna make me sick? And so this ability to taste, as much as there's that enjoyment, it serves as a warning to us. Because when things go bad, there's a chemical change that produces a bad taste. And so we have that ability given to us. Our sense of taste can keep us from eating what's bad or even getting poisoned. And so, but like the other senses, everything is being processed in the brain in order for us to be able to interact with the environment that's around us without bringing us harm. Our sense of smell, we've got somewhere between 5 and 6 million receptor neurons that pick up the smells that are around us. Again, send it to the brain. Those are at the back of the nose where these sensory neurons are. And odor molecules from things in the air, they bind to those receptor tips, and that's what enables us to be able to smell things. And so, if it's the apple pie that's on the windowsill, we enjoy that, and we're glad to have those ones stick around. You ever notice when you drive by a skunk that had got hit? The smell Now, I'm already past it. I'm a kilometer past where that skunk got hit, but I'm still smelling the skunk. That's because that's the last smell to get onto the receptor tips, and you're needing a new smell to replace that one. And so that's when we go find the apple pie wherever it is, right? That's what these sensory neurons do, and then again take that to the brain and so forth. Both our sense of smell and our sense of taste are able to create memories. Maybe you've got a memory of a certain smell or a certain taste. Maybe grandma's apple pie. I'm stuck on apple pie right now, but maybe grandma's apple pie or something like that. And that brings back good memories for us. Or it can bring back bad memories for us, whether it's the sense of smell or the sense of taste. I used to love white chocolate. And then on one occasion, after eating white chocolate, I got severely sick. I don't think it had anything to do with the white chocolate. I think I likely was coming down with something. But I've tried to eat white chocolate since then, and I just simply can't do it. It brings back that memory. There's something more than physical things going on there when we're talking about memories being created like that, whether good or bad. And so there's this fascinating connection between our nose, our mouth, our brain. All right, the final of the senses is that of touch. And we're not going to talk just about the fingers and so forth, but the skin. It's the largest organ that we have on our body. Contains millions and upon millions of receptors, able to detect all kinds of things: pressure, temperature, wind, moisture, all those kinds of things. And the information is then used, taken in by our skin, in order to help regulate body temperature. And so our core temperature is supposed to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 37 degrees Celsius. And so the skin is able to send information and receive information from the brain that will adjust what's going on with our skin. If we need to sweat some, then we're going to do that. If we get too hot, it increases the activity in our sweat glands, and we sweat a bit, and then the air hits the sweat as it evaporates. That helps to cool us down. If we get too cold, then the blood vessels just underneath the skin will become very narrow, and so that keeps the blood away from the skin surface, again, protecting the core temperature of the body. And so, just, again, amazing design inside of what we see in our skin system. There's a lot more that could be said about those five senses and about how all they all work and work together. But we'll leave it at that. Dr. Werner Gitt, in the Seisman Review back in December 1989, he wrote this. He said, "Without a doubt, the most complex information processing system in existence is the human body. If we take all human information processes together, i.e. conscious ones, language, information control, deliberate voluntary movements, and unconscious ones, information-controlled functions of organs, hormone systems, and so forth, this involves the processing of 10 to the power of 24 bits daily. This astronomically high figure is higher by a factor of 1 million than the total human knowledge of 10 to the 18th power bits stored in the world's libraries." Think about that. All the information available in all the libraries of the world. And he says the amount of information that is being processed inside of our body on a daily basis exceeds that by 1 million times. That's complex. That's amazing design. And where there is design, there must be a designer. Evolution cannot explain what's going on. Only God is the explanation. Tomorrow morning, Lord willing, we'll be together, and we're going to look at DNA and mutation at 10 o'clock. Mutation is not a good thing, and yet the whole evolutionary theory is based on mutation. No mutation, no evolution, right? Mutation is not a good thing. We'll talk about how DNA works and about mutation, and then at 11 o'clock our plan will be to talk about fossils and fairy tales. There are all kinds of fossils out there, all kinds of things that have been dug up that reveal various creatures. And then there's the fairy tales about fossils that haven't been dug up. And trying to find those intermediaries and those common ancestors between man and chimpanzee and ape and so forth. And things have been made up in order to justify the idea that somehow we've evolved to be what we are from something else. And so those are where we're headed as we go forward tomorrow. If you are here with us today and you've not obeyed the gospel of Christ, maybe you know there is a God, you believe the Bible is His Word, but you've not done what you need to do with it, can I encourage you to do so? I just said what we're going to do when we come together tomorrow, but that's assuming we have tomorrow. I don't know if the Lord gives us tomorrow or not. And so today is the day of salvation. Today is the day to make ourselves ready with God. And so if you've not done so, we certainly would love to help you in obedience to the gospel, receiving a confession of faith and acknowledging your repentance of sin and having you baptized in water for the forgiveness of sins.
I'm not ashamed to own my Lord, nor to defend